Welcome to the Turin School of Regulation interviews. It's a short series of short debates about regulation of services and digital markets, in particular in these extraordinary times. Today, we will discuss a technology that is frequently quoted, but actually not really understood by people. I mean, also people that is informed about markets, evolution, and technology. With me, to unveil the secrets of blockchain and its impact, potential impacts on markets and regulation, is Jelle Gerbrandy. Hi, Jelle, and thank you for accepting our invitation.
Thank you for inviting me.
And Giorgio Brosio will join us in our discussion from Torino. Hi, Giorgio. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me also.
Jelle Gerbrandy has a PhD in logic and worked for many years in software development in different areas. For the past years, he has been mostly working with startups in the blockchain space. Giorgio is Professor of Economics at University of Turin and member of the board of the Turin School of Regulation. I am Franco Becchis, Scientific Director of the Turin School of Regulation. Jelle, let me start with an apparently trivial question. What exactly is blockchain?
So yeah, it's not really a trivial question. Actually, there are probably many different ways to answer the question, but I suppose that for the purposes here, it's best to think of the blockchain as a set of technologies that allow people who do not know each other and do not trust each other to coordinate on the state of what you could call a public register. So this is a bit abstract, but a typical example of what a public register could be is, for example, the balance of your bank account. So the balance of your bank account is something that obviously you cannot decide by yourself, and also not you among friends. You have to agree with everybody in the world who pays you, or especially who you are paying, what exactly the balance of your bank account is. And so we need a public, now objective place where somebody can attest that the state of your bank account is, the balance of your bank account is this, exactly this, so everybody agrees. And so this register of bank accounts is like managed, maintained by banks. Now, the banking system provides the trust. If the bank says that you have enough money to buy my house, then I trust the bank, and I will give you my house and trust the bank to transfer the money to me. The blockchain can replace that function of the banks, and so the blockchain. So this is what Bitcoin does in practice. It does what banks do in this respect. So it keeps a register of balances, bank account balances, basically, with not euro or dollars in there, but Bitcoin, and it allows you to transfer those. But this like function of a public register, of course, has more applications than just money and banking. Like another very obvious example is I'm not sure how you call it in English. What is called in Italian the catasto, the list of cadaster. Yes. So a list of which spaces there are in the city, who owns them, how big they are, etc. So there is like a public office which holds these records and does a lot of administration. And this, so this is a public register provided in this case by the state, and so there are other examples. So so this is what the blockchain does.
Thank you. And you have already quoted some case study, but is there a case, a sector that you know particularly well that can give an example of how blockchain concretely can change markets or can shape markets. And later we will discuss also the regulatory implication. But for the time being, do you have a particularly relevant case study to show to us?
Yes. So, I mean, one of the criticisms, I think, of blockchain technology is that it's for many years presented as a very promising and very disruptive technology, but the actual disruptions are not happening so much. So I think there are so many examples of potential potential applications of the blockchain that could really change how the world is functioning. But what is happening, in fact, is that the actual, I don't want to go yet into regulation here. So just to give like a very specific example of where the blockchain is actually working. And so there I think several examples. But one is Bitcoin itself. So this is like the first blockchain system. And so what it's meant to do is allow for, well, actually it's doing two things. It's a system which creates this new object called Bitcoin, which actually has value. I mean, Bitcoin now is worth almost $10,000. And of course, when it started in 2008, it was worth nothing, really zero. So this is by itself an amazing feat. I mean, to create objects that only live on the internet, which are purely abstract objects. I mean, they only are in cyberspace, which are worth real money. And real money means you can actually buy stuff with them. You can trade them with other people in the world and in exchange for goods. So that is one big success case. I mean, even though it's not really disruptive because we already had money, of course. I mean, but it's a new way of creating money. It's a way of creating money without a state or without a bank, which is pretty amazing in itself. And then other thing which Bitcoin does provides is a way to transfer this value, to transfer intermediaries. So again, without banks, without states, I can send my Bitcoin to you without the permission of anybody. And I'm in complete control of the Bitcoin that I hold. I don't need to ask anybody to transfer them for me. So I think this is already an example of a big success. It exists for more than 10 years, Bitcoin. It's not a new example, but it's the most successful one, I would say.
Jelle, algorithms are at the core of digital economy and also blockchain sector. But we hear frequently that algorithms are also an instrument to increase market power and facilitate market power abuse. That is the real problem for regulation. But can you explain us how concretely the development of algorithms can build market power or abuse of it, and if the transparency in algorithm composition is a real question or not?
Yeah, so this is, I mean, so algorithms, it's a very generic term. I mean, so basically everything that the computer does is an algorithm. So I think you're referred to like specific algorithms, like for example, Google search, the way that, I don't know, I'm pushing products on the site. So this is not really much to do with the blockchain. And so, yeah, I mean, of course, I mean, the thing that Google search at least sells is an algorithm. I mean, this is their big selling point, and they have enormous power in the world because they have a better algorithm to search on the internet than anybody else. So yeah, what was the question?
Okay, okay. Let's pass to another tricky question, in particular from the point of view of regulation, that is the privacy question and the, uh, the problems that can arise in a blockchain environment in relation to the European legislation and the European legislation, the GDPR.
Yeah. So I think regulation and blockchain is really a very interesting topic indeed, and there are two aspects to this. So one question is in how far. I mean, so basically in the in Europe and in the United States, there are the lawmakers have two types of we can call privacy laws. So one type is meant to protect consumers. So there's in Europe the GDPR, which basically sets out a set of rules that companies have to follow when they collect data about people, and so they have to basically they have to be responsible about it, and they have to remove the data when you ask for it, and so these are a set of reasonable laws, so that's one aspect of privacy laws. Another aspect of privacy regulation is, on the contrary, companies have, especially companies which work with finance, with financial records, have an obligation from the state to collect a lot of information from the users. So it's the other way around. And instead of the law asking them to collect little, it's asking them to collect as much as possible. If I'm a company and I collect money from people and I want to pass it on to somebody else, before I can pass it on to this third person, I have to get a copy of his passport, he has to prove who he is, and money laundering laws. I mean, of course, there are reasons behind these laws. So one is anti-mafia, anti-money laundering, and the other aspect of that is not so explicit, but it's definitely there, is surveillance. I mean, especially after the 11th of September, surveillance of citizens has become a big project, let's say, of national states, nation states. So in Bitcoin fights itself, I think, in conflict with both of these types of laws. Bitcoin, the blockchain by its very nature is public. I mean, it's public because it needs to be checked. And so all information that is there can never be removed. It's just the fact of how it works. So if the GDPR specifically obliges a company to offer to its users the possibility to forget about their information, a company that uses the blockchain to store those data cannot provide that. It cannot follow that rule. I mean, it's just impossible. So yeah, I mean, this is there's another aspect also of the GDPR, which is also interesting, I think, here. So what many projects on the blockchain are collective projects. So projects between those groups of programmers or interested people. And so that means that there's no legal entity which is single-handedly responsible for this project, right? So if if you work with a group of people and you write software and you collect data of people, it's not clear who would be legally responsible, who would have to follow the GDPR, and this gives. So yeah, this is bad for development in this sector, because it gives a lot of legal insecurity. Now you can get involved in a project and contribute to a project and might be held legally responsible for that, even though the only thing you did was spend 2 hours writing code.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's one thing. The other thing is let's say the anti-privacy regulation. So blockchain. I mean, so most interesting and most successful applications on the blockchain are financial in nature. And so there are different types. So one type is trading, so speculation basically. But another type is also crowdfunding. And there've been, like, especially 2-3 years ago, there's been a phase where many new projects have collected, raised money for starting new projects from people all over the world. And basically these, especially the second type of crowdfunding, is basically being shut down by, mostly by the SEC, the American authority for because these things follow under normal investment laws, which are very, very strict. I mean, you cannot just start a company and then sell shares to that company to anybody else. You need to follow lots of procedures, and rightly so. But if on the blockchain you provide a platform to do that very small, in any case, these laws apply there. So basically, these many types of innovation in the blockchain is de facto illegal. And illegal just because there's not a good legal framework, and the lawmakers apply the existing framework, which is meant for much larger scale ventures, and also ventures of a different kind. So yeah, there are, so you could say that it has a difficult relation with legislation.
Jelle, I wanted to ask you, question about cost, no? I mean, the examples I know of existing blockchain are example, blockchain, they are generating revenue. So itself, for example, like the case of cryptocurrencies, or I saw case of where states, as a big organization, firms, they have set up a blockchain, and they the money to. But let's say, let's consider the case of suppose a small community or a small group of people, like the example you made of crowdfunding. It could be not only for investment purpose, but for example, creating a register of contribution to some joint ventures, like financing a public good or so much. And I was wondering, what would be the cost, of setting up such a platform and then of running it? Because contrary to most cases, this platform will not generate revenue for itself, from itself, or for itself.
Yeah, so it's a good question.
Are there barriers to entry originated by the initial cost of the investment?
Okay, so it's a good question. So so there are very, very many blockchains, right? In the sense of very many different public registers with different rules. Bitcoin is one of them. Ethereum is another very big one, but there are thousands. And also all this software is open source. So that means in practice that you can just take that software and copy it and do with it what you want. So one thing to know is that many of these systems like Bitcoin and Ethereum, they are open platforms. Anybody can use them. It's free to use them. It's not, you pay transaction costs to use them for every single transaction that you do. So you could say, there's not really a market which works like that, but you could say that you're paying exactly the cost of the service that you are using. So the entry costs are not there. They're not in setting up a blockchain. The blockchain is already there. It's free for you to use. It's like the internet in a way. You pay for your connection to the internet, but once you have your connection, the rest of the internet is just not there for you to Google and to make your websites in and whatever you want to do. That said, the entry costs to set up like a new project are really very high because of the technological complexity. It's still, even though it exists for a very long time, it's still a new experimental system. And so what you would need is a developer to make your project, and your developer will cost a lot of money because that's how it is. So I think the entry costs are there. On the other hand, if you would want to set up a group of people to finance some public good, like do a crowdfunding campaign to set up a little COVID hospital or something, right? What you would do is use an existing platform for that. You would not start something really from scratch, right? And there, I mean, there are some existing platforms you could look at to do. So yeah. So,
Thank you.
Jelle, thank you. And may I ask you a personal question? Do you are you available to give Bitcoin to a crowdfunding campaign today with a valuable goal? Would you be comfortable to use this channel for charity, for voluntary goals, or not?
well, I would say that if you were to start a charity cause, you would just use Bitcoin as one of the options for payment. I mean, there's no, if you do something that is completely illegal, so it's not like WikiLeaks, then there's no reason for you not to use existing platforms, right? Yeah, it depends a bit also on how international your situation is. So one of the problems with raising money in an international context is that you have to sort of like interface with the legal requirements of every country where you raise the money in. So for getting paid, this is not so bad, but especially for paying. So suppose you want to like set up like a big charity, which is funding like hospital beds everywhere in the world. So to fund those hospital beds, to get the money actually to that hospital in like a country in Africa, you have to go to all kinds of legal procedures to do it well. You could just also send them some cash in an envelope. But to transfer money to a bank account, you have to invoice, you have to prove that you're not doing illegal stuff, you're not doing money laundering. So in those cases, the blockchain can circumvent all this bureaucracy. And yeah.
Okay. Okay. Jelle, thank you very much for this interesting discussion. I know that blockchain is about difficult questions and difficult answers, but we have tried to outline some of these in this short interview. Thank you, Jelle. Thank you, Giorgio, for participating, and see you in the next Turin School of Regulation interviews in the next week. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
No, thank you.